What is up, guys? It is the Sound Alchemist, and today I'm back to bring you 40 facts on the Warhammer 40K universe. Now, if you guys didn't pay attention for yesterday's video, or if you didn't catch that, we did talk about Luft Huron, the Tyrant of Badab. Now, this guy was an Imperial Space Marine who let all this power, wealth, and overall power, because that's what it comes down to, go to his head, and he eventually succumbed to the powers of chaos. Once again, power corrupts. So, with that being said, now we're talking about this corrupted form of Luft Huron, which he goes by Huron Blackheart. This guy is pretty cool. Like I said before, I really love the sculpt for Luft Huron, and when he goes to Chaos, it's still a pretty amazing sculpt. He even has like a little dinosaur thing. We'll get to that later. But without further ado, guys, let's jump into 40 facts on Huron Blackheart. So the Badab War burnt on for almost a decade, consuming stars, planets, and billions of lives. If you guys want more information on the Badab War, check out the playlist. We've got about 7 or 8 parts on it, and more to come. Anyway, an uprising came to an end in the early 41st century with the fall of Badab Primaris and the final defeat of the Astral Claws. At its end, the rebellious Astral Claws were pushed back into the Badab system and the fortress of the Palace of Thorns. The forces of retribution closed in, and the scene was set for one of the most brutal planetary assaults in Imperial history. Rolling bombardments turned cities to dust and shattered stone. Pillars of ash and fire rose from the ruins to touch the heavens. And from out of that smoke-clogged city, 7 companies of the Star Phantoms chapter descended like avenging angels as the battle raged across Badab and through that Palace of Thorns. The Astral Claws and their vassal forces made the Star Phantoms bleed for every scrap of ground. But hour by hour, more of their defenseless positions were lost, and finally, at last, Captain Zukal Androcles of the Star Phantoms fatally wounded Huron with a Melta blast. The tyrant fell, and the Badab War ended. Taken from the battlefield by a cadre of his veterans, Huron had clung to life through sheer force of will, despite being reduced to an unrecognizable heap of charred flesh and armor, which was missing most of his right side. Bearing the broken body of their lord, the last of the Astral Claws fled. Only about a contingent or 200 renegade Astral Claws, now devotees of Chaos Undivided, managed to fight their way through the Exorcist's blockade and escaped into deep space, taking refuge in the hellish realm known as the Maelstrom. There they joined the horde of aliens, renegades, and heretics that made the Maelstrom their home. Amongst the warp-saturated clouds of dust and gas, Tech Marines and apothecaries labored over the remains of Huron for 7 days and 7 nights. And on that 8th day, Huron rose and looked on what remained of his chapter. He saw a ragged band of loyal warriors, a last remnant of a past that was now long dead. Barely a company's strength had survived the fall of the Palace of Thorns, and amongst them stood veterans and new initiates alike. When his battle brothers looked back at what did they see? A walking body of scar tissue and machinery, its wound-chewed face twitching from agony held back by his iron will. Without a word, the Astral Claws knelt to Huron, then and there. He beheld his remaining warriors in silence, and through the firm of pain and near-death madness, he saw a new path for himself and his brothers. He spoke, telling them to rise, to strike out the symbols of loyalty to the Imperium which had betrayed them, and to paint their armor red for the blood of their murdered brothers. They would survive, he said, and they would rise. And in that moment, the survivors of the Badab shed their last tattered scraps of honor. The Astral Claws were indeed no more. Only their bloody shadows remained, clad in the crimson that would give them their new name. They are the Red Corsairs. Huron and his limited forces easily overwhelmed the first pirate stronghold that they found, slaughtering all the Corsairs within. The survivors swore allegiance to the tyrant and then became his slaves, soon learning to fear his fury. On renegade worlds, Huron slew petty kings and forced mutant lords to kneel at his feet. When the other pirate lords of the Maelstrom refused his demands, he slew their followers, looted their holdings, and then gave them to the warp-twisted mutants infesting his ships. Soon the outcasts of the Maelstrom learned not to refuse the master of the Red Corsairs. From the pirates and renegade navigator clans, he took ships. From the populations of dank slave worlds and rust-filled space stations, he took flesh and muscle to labor in his holds. Piece by piece, Huron and his Red Corsairs built a dark mirror to the lost realm of Badab. From his throne on the rusted space station, Hell's Iris, Huron watched as his power grew, unbounded by the strictures of the Imperium. Ragged fleets of ships raided into the Imperium, bled its worlds of slaves and riches, and then returned to the heap at his feet. The descendants of the Maelstrom named Huron the Blackheart, and he wears that title like a crown. In battle, Huron has led his Red Corsairs against the Imperium time and time again. The Blood Reaver, they call him, and it is a title that he has earned well. System closed to the Maelstrom have suffered increasingly bold raids since the rise of the Red Corsairs. Often these raids are as swift as they are brutal. Corsair ships appear, crush their prey with overwhelming force, and then withdraw as fast as they came to sea. Besides these bloody raids, Huron has personally led a series of spectacular grand attacks on the Imperium. On Villamus, he destroyed the gene seed stock of the Marines errant, condemning this chapter to a slow, painful death, and so repaying in spite the role they played in the fall of Badab. At Paranexus, Huron burned a strike force with the Space Wolves and Deathhawk chapters, taking the strike cruiser Wolf of Fenris as prize, and slaying the Wolf Lord Grinrill Bluetooth. As the end of times draws ever nearer, Huron's strength increases, and the Maelstrom swells to claim worlds that it has never touched before. Huron watches, while his forces raid ever deeper into the Imperium. Some say that the Blood Reaver is waiting, that the forces he has so far unleashed are but a fraction of his might. What he waits and watches for, none know, but the Lords of Terra fear that when that hour comes, the fallen tyrant of Badab will return to claim the throne from which he was cast down. And now we talk about this man's infamous war gear, beginning with his armor. As former master of a well-resourced and equipped Space Marine chapter, Huron has access to a plethora of arms and war gear, including a number of suits of armor of various types. But perhaps the most famous of these was the Armor of Pride, a heavily customized set of Terminator armor, adapted and augmented for him by the Astral Claw's master artificer, Arminius Valthex. Since his fall to Chaos, his armor has changed due to long exposure to the warp, as well as it displays now the usual iconography of Chaos. The Tyrants Claw. This claw is a monstrous, bear-like bionic arm and shoulder that was built to replace Huron's own arm. This Tyrant's Claw is a power fist that incorporates a built-in heavy flamer. It was built from the remnants of a relic lightning claw known as the Ghost Razor, which fragmentary evidence suggests was gifted to him by the remnants of the Tiger Claws chapter in gratitude to their savior. The Ghost Razor was destroyed during the fall of Badab when it was struck by a Melta blast. The device exploded catastrophically, incinerating Huron's right arm and most of his right side. Like its predecessor, the Tyrant's Claw is a heavily armored gauntlet that houses a number of articulated blades. In close combat, it is an all but unmatched weapon. The unidentified phase frequency disruption fields imparted to their cutting edges prove able to slice through solid matter at a submolecular level, parting ceramite and adamantium plates effortlessly, and sundering energy fields and force barriers with ease. The heavy flamer incorporated into this is commonly employed as a squad support weapon by Terminator units deployed into closely confined battle zones. The use of such a weapon by a Space Marine commander was an unorthodox choice, but one that has clearly reflected Huron Blackheart's preference for participating at the forefront of a battle. The heavy flamer's specific pattern remains unknown, and it was likely a direct creation of Arminius Valthax in his capacity as the Tyrant's very own personal armorer and weaponsmith. The Iron Halo. The Iron Halo on Blackheart's armor emits a very strong gravity conversion field around its wearer, which makes his armor even more harder to pierce with enemy weapons. In addition, it also provides its wearer with immense resilience to even the most potent of weapons on the battlefield, such as las cannons and missiles. The shield stands a good chance of deflecting many deadly projectiles that would normally be able to slay a space marine. The Power Axe. Huron Blackheart's Power Axe may be a secondary weapon, but it is no less fearsome. While the Tyrant's Claw slashes enemies to pieces and sets them ablaze with its flames, Huron wields the axe in his left hand, dispatching enemies foolish enough to get it within range of the short swings of this heavy, bloody blade. And finally, we get to Huron's familiar, the Hamadryas. So the Hamadryas is a particular creature which seems bound to Huron Blackheart. Slick-skinned, with blank red eyes, it resembles something like a featherless bird or a skinless dog. But when it is seen on the edge of its sight, its shape tends to change, bloating in size or turning into a flickering pillar of flame. The Hamadryas is, in truth, a creature of the warp, and it has begun its life merely as a thought, a potentiality, a tendril of insubstantial warp stuff that draped itself across Huron's mantle. Over solar weeks, months, and then standard years, it became something more tangible. In its earliest stage, it was nothing more than a wisp, a curl of smoky air that lingered around the transhuman warrior's shoulder, like a misty snake, wrapping itself protectively around him. Huron himself seemed either oblivious or indifferent to its preference, but over time he began to notice that he was developing a sensitivity, and then a resistance to psychic intrusions. This creature seems to gift Huron with strange powers, slowing time, allowing him to see lies, and to know truths that no mortal should. The more he realized this, the stronger this warden became, until the ethereal presence at his shoulder took on a more corporeal form. Sometimes it was reptilian, sometimes avian, other times simian, but always animalistic, and never larger than the breadth of the Astartes' shoulder span. Others could see it, but never for long. Most of the time, it could only be glimpsed briefly out of the corner of the eye, leaving the viewer wondering if they had even seen it at all. But it does have its limitations. The further Huron strays from the maelstrom, the weaker this dinosaur-like creature will become. And with that being said, guys, this is all the lore we have for the Tyrant of Badab, the warrior known as Luft Huron, or better yet, Huron Blackheart. So this guy, in my opinion, is the number 2 baddest mofo of chaos. Obviously, number 1's got to be Abaddon, and then this guy comes in number 2. So he's essentially a powerful pirate, machine, android thing coming to steal your stuff and just make his forces bigger. He was really smart. If you guys want to see how he rose to power, check out our part 1. Or I don't even think it's called part 1. I think it's just called 40 Facts on Luft Huron. It talks about his rise to becoming the Tyrant of Badab, and then obviously this part talks about his fall to chaos. Really good storytelling. If you guys have the chance to, I recommend you guys getting the Badab War books. Really awesome. Or check out our series. We do have like a 7 or 8 part series on the Badab War, and it's still unfinished, so we got more to come on that. So stay subscribed for more Badab War lore. And yeah, so let me know all in all what you guys think about this guy. If you play him on the battlefield, how much of a badass is he? If Abaddon and Huron went at it, who would come out on top? Obviously Abaddon, because of a storyline. But if plot was not a part of this, who do you think would win? I gotta give it to Huron. He's got more oomph around him. I mean, he was blown in half with a melt-a-gun. survived it, came back better than ever. I don't think Abaddon could do that. So anyway, guys, leave your comments down below. And as always, that's pretty much all I've got. This has been the Sound Alchemist, part of One Mind Syndicate, and I'll catch you guys tomorrow.